Two twin sisters live under the relentless control of their stepmother in a luxurious mansion. Their father, an absent businessman, believes that strict discipline is the key to success. When the truth comes to light, he confronts the stepmother, and the family must start anew with a different perspective. Chapter 1. The afternoon sun set slowly over the Miami horizon, painting the sky in orange hues that contrasted with the turquoise waters of Biscayne Bay. High on the slope of the elegant Coconut Grove neighborhood, an imposing colonial mansion stood out among the other luxury residences. Behind those white walls and the wrought iron gate, reality was quite different from the postcard image the city offered to tourists. Inside the Ashford mansion, the silence was broken only by the metallic sound of cutlery touching porcelain during dinner. Seated at the table, the 16-year-old twins, Isabel and Eleanor, kept their eyes fixed on their plates, while Deborah, their stepmother, watched them with an eagle eye. Isabel, sit up straight. Your elbow should not touch the table, Deborah ordered, her voice as sharp as a razor. The young woman immediately adjusted her posture, casting a quick glance at her sister. Although they were physically identical, with their wavy brown hair and honey-colored eyes, those who knew them could easily tell them apart. Isabel had a defiant glint in her eyes, a spark that not even Deborah's rigidity had managed to extinguish. Eleanor, on the other hand, seemed more fragile, like a frightened bird, always ready to shrink at the slightest sign of confrontation. Sorry, Isabel murmured, turning her attention back to her nearly untouched plate. Don't mumble, Isabel. A well-bred young lady articulates her words clearly, Deborah reprimanded, arranging the napkin on her lap with precise, calculated gestures. On the other side of the long mahogany table, Richard Montgomery Ashford, the girl's father and one of the most successful real estate developers in Florida, kept his eyes fixed on his smartphone, answering emails even during dinner. His physical presence at the table did not mean emotional presence. He was just another body occupying space in the mansion he had built with such pride. The math grades came in today, Deborah announced, cutting a piece of chicken with surgical precision. Eleanor an A-. Good but not excellent. Isabel a B+, disappointing. Eleanor lowered her head even further, while Isabel gripped her fork tightly, the knuckles of her fingers turning white with tension. Dad, I had the second highest grade in the class, Isabel tried, seeking a look of recognition. Richard finally lifted his eyes from his phone, running a hand through the graying hair at his temples. Second best isn't the best, Isabel. You have the potential for more. Excuse me, Richard said, rising from the table after barely touching his food. I have a video conference with investors from New York City in 10 minutes. And so he left, leaving a void that seemed to swallow the air in the dining room. The twins exchanged quick glances, a silent communication only they understood. It was a language developed over the years to survive in that suffocating environment, ever since their mother, Lucia, had passed away after a sudden illness took her 5 years ago. You have 20 minutes to finish dinner, and then head to your studies. Tonight, you need to finish the science project and practice piano for 1 hour each, Deborah declared, checking her wristwatch. But the project is not due for another 2 weeks, Isabel protested, instantly regretting her words. The look Deborah shot her was enough to freeze her blood. In this house, we do not leave tasks for the last minute. That is how excellence is built. Your father did not get where he is by procrastinating. After dinner, while they were clearing the kitchen under Deborah's watchful eye, Eleanor let a plate slip from her trembling hands. The sound of porcelain shattering on the marble floor echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot. Look what you've done! Deborah exclaimed, her face contorted with rage. This dish was from the special collection, imported from England. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, Eleanor stammered, already bending down to pick up the shards. Leave it, Deborah ordered, grabbing Eleanor's wrist too tightly. As punishment, you two will wash all the dinner dishes by hand. No dishwasher. And you may only go to bed when everything is spotless. But we have a test tomorrow, Isabel tried to argue. You should have thought of that before destroying valuable objects, Deborah replied, her cold smile not reaching her eyes. Perhaps this will teach you to be more careful. As Deborah left the kitchen, Isabel hugged her sister, who was visibly trembling. It's going to be okay, Ellie, she whispered. I'll help you and we'll finish quickly. She's going to tell Dad, Eleanor murmured, tears shining in her eyes. And since when does he listen? Or really look at us? Isabel answered bitterly, starting to gather the broken pieces. He only sees those spreadsheets and contracts. In the second-floor library, Richard analyzed the numbers of his newest venture, a luxury resort in the Florida Keys. The graphs on his laptop screen showed promising projections. He smiled with satisfaction, thinking about how this would be another step in securing his daughter's future. In his mind, every extra hour of work, every weekend meeting, every business trip was a necessary sacrifice to build an empire that would one day be theirs. Richard, Deborah's voice pulled him from his thoughts as she entered the library. "We need to talk about the girls," he sighed, taking off his glasses and rubbing his tired eyes. "Is there a problem?" Eleanor broke a piece from the English collection, she informed him, sitting in the leather armchair next to his desk. "Furthermore, Isabel's grades remain average. I'm concerned about her lack of dedication." Richard nodded distractedly. "You're taking good care of them, Deborah. I trust your judgment. I'm doing my best, but sometimes I think they need a boarding school. A more structured environment," Deborah suggested, carefully watching Richard's reaction. "Boarding school?" He frowned. "I don't know if it's necessary to go that far." "It's just a suggestion," she smiled, touching his hand. "Think about it. Now I'll go check if they've finished in the kitchen." Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Isabel and Eleanor worked side by side, their hands red from the hot water. "Remember when Mum used to make that chocolate cake with fudge frosting, and we'd get the whole kitchen messy?" Eleanor asked, a rare smile lighting up her face. Isabel smiled at the memory, and she never got mad. She would just laugh and say we were her little bakers. "I miss her every day," Eleanor confessed, her voice almost a whisper. "Me too," Isabel replied, drying a plate with more force than necessary. "But we have each other, Ellie, and one day we're getting out of here. I promise." The sound of heels on the floor announced Deborah's return. The sisters immediately went back to work in silence, the moment of nostalgia broken by the relentless reality of their lives. Upstairs, Richard looked out the window at the illuminated city below. His thoughts drifted to Lucia and how she used to light up the house with her smile. He hadn't realized how cold and oppressive the mansion had become since she was gone. Or perhaps he had chosen not to notice, burying himself in work to avoid facing the pain of loss. The sound of a soft piano melody interrupted his thoughts. One of the twins had begun her nightly practice. The music, melancholic and beautiful, echoed through the mansion's corridors, like a ghost of happier times. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself to feel something beyond the constant drive to produce, accumulate and build. When he opened his eyes again, his decision was made. He would work even harder to complete the resort more quickly. Then he could finally offer his daughters the life they deserved. Without realizing it, he was repeating the same cycle, believing that material success would compensate for his emotional absence. That night, long after Deborah had retired, Isabel slipped into Eleanor's room. Lying side by side in the bed, as they did when they were little, the twins stared at the ceiling, where small adhesive stars, remnants of the decoration their mother had put up years ago, still glowed faintly in the dark. "Izzy, do you think things will ever get better?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely audible. Isabel squeezed her sister's hand. "They will. We have to believe that. And until that day comes, we have each other." That was how they fell asleep, hand in hand, finding solace in the only constant thing in their lives, the love they shared. Outside the room, the Ashford mansion remained imposing. Hiding behind its luxurious walls, the secrets and pains of a family on the brink of a transformation none of them could foresee. Chapter 2. The routine at the Ashford mansion invariably began at 5:30 a.m., when the alarm clock went off in the twins' rooms. There was no time for laziness or for those transitional moments between dream and wakefulness. By 5:45 a.m., Deborah was already knocking at the door, conducting her first inspection of the day. On that Tuesday morning, the Miami sky was still dark when Isabel and Eleanor stood side by side, their uniforms impeccably pressed, their hair tied back in identical ponytails, waiting for Deborah's morning approval. Beds made, books organized, backpacks prepared. Deborah checked every detail as she walked through Isabel's room. She stopped in front of a small photograph on the bedside table, a faded image of Lucia with the twins, when they were about 10 years old, with wide smiles at Bayfront Park. "This should be on the memory shelf, not here," Deborah said, picking up the photograph. "It's my only picture with my mother," Isabel protested, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "Her memory won't disappear if the photo is stored in its proper place," Deborah replied, placing the picture frame in a box in the closet. "Now come down for breakfast. You have 20 minutes before your physics tutoring session." On the way to the kitchen, Eleanor held her sister's arm. "Izzy, it's not worth fighting over this. It'll only make things worse." Isabel swallowed the anger rising inside her. "How much longer are we going to put up with this, Ellie? She can't control everything in our lives." "Shh," Eleanor warned, looking around nervously. "She has ears everywhere." In the kitchen, Mrs. Wallace, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for over 20 years, was serving breakfast: omelettes with goat cheese and fresh orange juice. The 60-year-old woman, with her time-worn face and kind eyes, was one of the few sources of affection in the girls' lives. "Good morning." "My flowers," Mrs. Wallace greeted in a low voice, taking advantage of Deborah's absence. "Did you sleep well?" "As always," Isabel replied with a half-smile. Mrs. Wallace discreetly placed a packet of homemade cookies in Eleanor's backpack. "For after school," she whispered with a wink. "Thank you," Eleanor murmured, a genuine smile lighting up her face for a brief moment. Deborah entered the kitchen, interrupting the interaction. "Mrs. Wallace, the gym uniforms need to be washed today. And don't forget that Friday's dinner needs to be special. Mr. Ashford's business partner will be present." "Yes, ma'am," Mrs. Wallace replied, immediately returning to her duties. During breakfast, the twins ate in silence, following the non-verbal rule that had been established in the house: speak only when absolutely necessary. Richard did not join them. He had left even earlier for an important meeting. "Professor Augustine will arrive in 10 minutes for the physics lesson," Deborah reminded them, consulting her tablet. "Then school. In the afternoon, Eleanor has speech therapy at 4 p.m., and Isabel has an educational psychology session at 5 p.m., piano at 7 p.m., supervised study from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. The twins nodded automatically. It was a slightly altered version of the same schedule as always, a routine so rigid it suffocated any spontaneity or joy. The morning proceeded as planned. Professor Augustine, a middle-aged man with thick glasses and thinning hair, spent 2 hours explaining concepts of quantum mechanics, advanced material for high school sophomores. Deborah insisted that the twins should always be ahead of the standard school curriculum. "Focus, Eleanor," the professor warned, noticing the young woman staring distractedly out the window. "This will be on the test on Friday." Eleanor quickly turned her attention back to her books, but her eyes still furtively captured the image of children playing in the park next to the mansion. Freedom, a concept almost forgotten in her life. At 7:30 a.m., the driver, Mr. Joseph, took them to Elite Preparatory Academy, one of the most prestigious institutions in Miami. The 15-minute drive was one of the few moments of relative freedom they had, without Deborah's constant surveillance. "So, girls excited for the school trip this weekend?" asked Mr. Joseph, a man with kind features and a grey mustache, who had worked for the family since before the twins were born. "What trip?" Isabel asked, exchanging a confused look with her sister. "To the historic Art Deco district, with a guided tour and a percussion workshop. It's been on the school bulletin boards for weeks," he replied, observing them through the rearview mirror. "Oh, that one," Eleanor said, lowering her eyes. "Deborah said we can't go. We need to focus on studying for the Math Olympiad." Mr. Joseph frowned but said nothing more. He was well aware of Deborah's methods and knew that any activity that might bring the girls pleasure was systematically vetoed. At school, the twins went to their respective classrooms. Although they were identical, Deborah had insisted they be in separate classes, claiming it would strengthen each one's independence and prevent constant comparisons by teachers. In reality, it was a calculated strategy to weaken the bond between them, making them more vulnerable to her control. But what Deborah didn't understand was that the bond between twins transcended physical proximity. It was a connection that not even separation during classes could break. During the break, Isabel met up with Leo, her classmate, and one of the few people with whom she maintained some kind of friendship. Sitting on a bench away from the main courtyard, They talked about their literature assignment. "So are you going to Jessica's birthday party on Saturday?" asked Leo, a young black man with an easy smile and bright eyes, whose musical talent was recognized throughout the school. Isabel gave a bitter laugh. "Are you kidding?" Deborah would never allow it. To her, parties are a waste of time and promiscuous environments. "Man, your stepmom sounds like she's from a 1960s horror movie," Leo commented, shaking his head. "I don't know how you guys put up with it." "We don't have a choice," Isabel replied, watching Eleanor on the other side of the courtyard, sitting alone with a book. "But it won't be forever. I'm saving my allowance and researching universities far from here." "And your sister?" Leo asked, following Isabel's gaze. "We'll go together, of course. I'd never abandon Ellie." At that moment, Isabel's phone vibrated. It was a message from Deborah. "Piano lesson moved up to 6 p.m. today. Don't be late." Isabel rolled her eyes. "See? We don't even have peace at school." The afternoon classes dragged on, with Isabel dividing her attention between the lesson content and thoughts on how she could help Eleanor become stronger. Her sister was becoming increasingly fragile, showing clear signs of anxiety, such as bitten nails, insomnia, and silent crying spells at night. At the end of the school day, while they waited for Mr. Joseph at the gate, Eleanor seemed particularly downcast. "What's wrong, Ellie?" Isabel asked, holding her sister's hand. "The history teacher spoke to me today," Eleanor confessed. "She's worried about my performance. She said my essays are empty, lacking my own opinion. And how could they be any different?" Isabel thought, but she limited herself to hugging her sister. "We'll figure it out. We always do." Back at the mansion, a surprise awaited the twins. Richard was home, in the entrance hall talking to Deborah. "Girls, glad you're home," he said, with a smile that didn't hide the fatigue in his eyes. "I have some news. The resort in the Keys will open in 3 months," he announced with evident pride, "and you two will be at the ceremony. It will be the beginning of a new chapter for our family." "That's amazing." "Dad," Isabel replied, trying to sound enthusiastic, although she knew it just meant more hours of work for Richard, and consequently, less time with them. "But that means you'll be away more," Eleanor observed, with a frankness that surprised even herself. Richard's smile faltered for a moment, and Deborah quickly intervened. "Your father is building a legacy for you. You should be more grateful and less selfish." "That's not what I meant," Eleanor retreated, returning to her usual submissive posture. "Well, I have a video conference in 15 minutes, Richard said, checking his watch. "We'll talk more at dinner." But everyone there knew that the conversation at dinner would be superficial and brief, as always. Richard would ask a few generic questions about school. Deborah would dominate the conversation with reports on the girls' educational progress, and soon he would be back in his office, lost in his projects and spreadsheets. "Go get ready for your afternoon activities," Deborah ordered after Richard left. "And Eleanor, your history teacher contacted me. I'm disappointed. We'll have to revise your study schedule." Eleanor's stomach sank. More hours hunched over books, less time to breathe or simply exist without pressure. Later, during the piano lesson, Isabel played a Beethoven sonata, her fingers gliding over the keys with technical precision, but no emotion. The teacher, Mrs. Cecilia, an elegant lady with over 40 years of experience, watched attentively. "Technically perfect, Isabel. But where is the feeling?" the teacher questioned. "Music isn't just about hitting the right notes." "Sorry, I'll try again," Isabel replied, aware that Deborah was watching the lesson from the doorway. "Technical perfection is what matters," Deborah intervened. "Feelings are subjective and variable. Precision is measurable and constant." Mrs. Cecilia gave Isabel a look of understanding before continuing with the lesson, adapting to Deborah's rigid expectations. After the piano lesson, during the supervised study session in the library, the twins worked side by side, under the distant supervision of Deborah, who was checking some documents on her laptop. Isabel discreetly slid a small piece of paper to Eleanor. On it she had written, "Leo invited me to Jessica's party. What if we went? We deserve some fun." Eleanor read the note and her eyes widened in fear. She quickly scribbled a reply, "Impossible." She would find out. "Remember what happened last time we tried to trick her?" Isabel sighed, remembering all too well. The previous year they had tried to attend a school trip to the historic district, but Deborah found out and punished them with a month of no contact with classmates outside of school hours. Additionally, they had to write a 20-page essay on honesty and obedience, but something inside Isabel refused to give up. She could no longer stand to see Eleanor's spirit being crushed day after day, nor could she accept that they remained prisoners in their own home. "I'm not giving up, Ellie," she thought, determined. "We have to find a way out." At dinner, Richard tried in his clumsy way to connect with his daughters. "How were your classes today?" he asked, between bites of the grilled salmon prepared by Mrs. Wallace. "Isabel got a perfect score on her chemistry test," Deborah informed him before either of the twins could answer. "And Eleanor needs to improve in history." Richard nodded, not noticing how Deborah controlled even the interactions between him and his daughters. "Chemistry? I remember your mother loved chemistry. That's how we met in college." A momentary silence hung over the table. It was rare for Richard to mention Lucia. "She would be very proud of you two," he continued with a distant look. "So smart, so beautiful." "Thanks, Dad," Isabel replied, seizing the rare moment of connection. "Can we look at some of Mom's photo albums sometime?" The question caught Richard by surprise. "Well, I don't know where the albums are. It's been so long." "They are organized in the attic closet," Deborah interjected quickly. "But now is not the time for that. You have the Math Olympiad coming up and need to focus on your studies." The brief moment of closeness evaporated, and dinner continued in silence. Afterward, while helping Mrs. Wallace clear the kitchen, one of the few household chores Deborah insisted they perform, to develop responsibility, the twins spoke in whispers. "Did you see how he talked about Mom?" Eleanor said, a sparkle in her eyes. "He still misses her." "Of course he does," Isabel replied. "But he chose to bury that feeling, just like he buried any real connection with us." "Don't say that," Eleanor protested. "He's just lost." Mrs. Wallace, who was discreetly listening to the conversation while putting away the dishes, intervened with her wisdom. "Your father is a good man who has forgotten what is truly important. Sometimes people need a shock to see what's right in front of them." That night, lying in their beds in separate rooms, both twins thought about what Mrs. Wallace had said. A shock to see what's in front of them. Perhaps that was exactly what Richard needed to finally see the truth about Deborah and about what his daughters' lives had become in the Ashford mansion. Chapter 3. Friday dawned with the Miami sky covered in gray clouds, a rarity in the sun-drenched Florida capital. The weather seemed to reflect the atmosphere in the Ashford mansion, which was especially tense due to the important dinner scheduled for that evening. It was 6 in the morning when Eleanor woke with a start, her heart racing and her breath catching in her throat. Another nightmare. They had become frequent in recent months, always involving suffocation, confinement, or endless falls. It wasn't hard to interpret the symbolism behind them. She got up silently, walked to the window, and opened a small gap in the curtains. She watched the light rain that was beginning to fall on the impeccably manicured garden. Even nature seemed controlled and tamed within Deborah's domain. The door opened without warning, and Eleanor jumped. "You're already up." "Excellent," Deborah said, entering the room as if it were her own. She never knocked, never respected her stepdaughter's privacy. "Today you and Isabel need to be impeccable for the dinner with Dr. Paul Reynolds. He is the biggest investor in your father's resort." "Yes, Ma'am," Eleanor replied automatically. "I've laid out the dresses you'll be wearing," Deborah continued, heading to the closet. "And I've scheduled Simone to come do your hair and makeup at 4. Can I wear the blue dress I got for my birthday?" Eleanor ventured, surprising herself with her own boldness. Deborah turned slowly, her expression a mixture of surprise and irritation. "The dress has already been chosen, Eleanor. Dark green for you, burgundy for Isabel. Colors that convey sophistication and maturity." Later at breakfast, Richard surprised everyone by appearing at the table. Normally on Fridays he left even earlier for weekly meetings with his executive team. "Good morning, family," he greeted, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Wallace offered him. "I've moved some appointments to be home earlier today. I want to make sure everything is perfect for the dinner with Paul." "Everything is already organized," Deborah assured him. "The caterers will arrive at 4 p.m. The decorations were finalized yesterday, and the girls will be appropriately presentable." "Presentable?" Richard laughed, looking at his daughters. "They are naturally beautiful like their mother." A momentary silence fell after the mention of Lucia. Deborah quickly changed the subject. "Remind the girls of the importance of this dinner, Richard." Richard nodded, his expression turning more serious. "Paul Reynolds is crucial for the final phase of the resort. He can help us expand into the international market. I want you both to demonstrate the excellent upbringing you have received." "Of course, Dad," Isabel replied. "We'll behave like perfect hostesses." There was something in her tone, a subtle irony that only Eleanor caught, prompting her to give her sister a warning look. After breakfast, the twins left for school as usual. In the car, Isabel seemed thoughtful, almost distant. "What are you thinking about?" Eleanor asked, recognizing her sister's expression, the one that usually preceded a dangerous idea. "Remember that photo album of Mom's that Deborah hid in the attic?" Isabel replied in a low voice, making sure Mr. Joseph couldn't hear them. "I thought we could look for it while everyone is busy with the dinner preparations." Eleanor's eyes widened. "That's too risky. Deborah has eyes everywhere. That's exactly why we have to be smart. She'll be so focused on the dinner details that she won't pay attention to us for a few hours." "What if we get caught?" Eleanor whispered, already imagining the consequences. "We'll say we were looking for something to show Dr. Reynolds. After all, he wants to get to know the family better, doesn't he?" Isabel replied, with a smile that mixed cunning and defiance. Eleanor didn't answer, but Isabel knew that silence. It wasn't a refusal, just understandable fear. Her sister would eventually agree, as she always did when it came to small rebellions that could connect them to their mother's memory. At school, the hours dragged on. Isabel could barely concentrate on her classes, mentally devising a plan to access the attic. Leo noticed her distraction during physics class. "Earth to Izzy," he joked, nudging her with the tip of his pencil. "What are you plotting? You look 1,000,000 miles away." "Nothing," she replied automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, Leo, what do you do when you need to rebel against your parents?" His smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. "Depends. My parents are strict but fair. Why? Are you planning to run away or something?" "Not exactly," she answered, hesitating. "I just want to breathe a little. Feel like I have some control over my own life." Leo studied her for a moment before replying, "Look, I don't know exactly what's going on at your house, but if you need help, you can count on me." "Thanks," she smiled, touched by his sincere offer. At the end of the school day, on their way home, Eleanor finally agreed to the plan. "All right, let's look for the album. But we have to be very careful." Isabel squeezed her sister's hand. "We always are." Arriving at the mansion, they found it bustling with activity. Catering staff were setting up tables in the sunroom. Florists were finalizing elaborate arrangements. Mrs. Wallace was coordinating the final house cleaning. Deborah circulated among everyone, checking every detail with an eagle eye. "Girls, straight to your showers," she ordered upon seeing them. "Simone will be here in an hour." Taking advantage of the general distraction, the twins went up to the 3rd floor where the attic access was located. The hallway was deserted, but they still walked with light, cautious steps. "You keep watch while I look," Isabel whispered, after unlocking the attic door with a key she had borrowed from Mrs. Wallace's keyring. The attic was spacious, lit only by the faint light filtering through a dusty skylight. Organized and labeled boxes filled the shelves. Even in this storage space, Deborah's obsession with order was evident. Isabel quickly located the section marked Memories and began to examine the boxes. "Found it!" she exclaimed softly after a few minutes, holding a brown leather album. Eleanor glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Quick, Izzy, we have to go back before anyone misses us." But Isabel had already opened the album and was engrossed in the images. Photos of a young Lucia and Richard at the beginning of their relationship, a radiant pregnant Lucia, the newborn twins. Birthdays, Christmases, trips to the beach, a family life full of smiles and spontaneous moments, so different from the controlled, cold existence they now led. "Look at this," Isabel said, showing a specific photo to Eleanor. In it, Lucia was hugging her daughters, then about 9 years old, in front of a painting she had done herself. Remember how she loved to paint? How the house was full of color before Deborah turned everything gray and beige, Eleanor completed, with an uncharacteristic bitterness in her usually soft voice. "Exactly. This isn't how it was supposed to be, Ellie. This isn't how Mom would have wanted us to live." A noise in the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps were approaching the attic door. "Hide the album!" Eleanor whispered in a panic. Isabel quickly tucked the album inside her uniform blouse, but there was no time to return the box to the shelf. The two positioned themselves near the exit, trying to look casual as the door opened. It was Mrs. Wallace, to their mutual relief. "Girls, what are you doing here?" the housekeeper asked, closing the door behind her. "Please don't tell Deborah," Eleanor pleaded. Mrs. Wallace noticed the suspicious bulge under Isabel's blouse. "What did you take?" Isabel showed her the album. "We just wanted to see pictures of our mom. It's been years since we've seen any pictures of her, besides the one I hide on my bedside table." Mrs. Wallace's expression softened. "I understand, my dears, but you know how Deborah would be if she found you here." "Please, we'll just look and put it back later," Isabel negotiated. The housekeeper sighed. "Take it to my room. After dinner, when everyone is busy, you can look at the photos there. It's safer." The twins hugged Mrs. Wallace gratefully. The housekeeper, who had watched them grow since they were babies, felt a mixture of compassion and helplessness at their situation. She knew she couldn't interfere directly, but she offered small refuges whenever possible. "Now go get ready. Simone has arrived and Deborah is looking for you." The next few hours were dedicated to preparing for dinner. Simone, the hairstylist and makeup artist, worked efficiently, transforming the twins according to Deborah's precise instructions. Light but sophisticated makeup, hair in low, elegant buns, nothing extravagant or flashy. "You look beautiful," Simone commented upon finishing. "You look like little women." That was exactly Deborah's goal, to present them as mature young women, reflections of her excellent education and discipline, trophies of Richard's success in both business and family life. At 7 p.m., dressed as instructed, the twins descended to the sunroom. The transformation of the space was impressive. Soft lights hung among tropical foliage. The impeccably set table gleamed with silverware and crystal, the scent of fresh orchids mixed with the tempting aroma of dishes being finalized in the kitchen. Richard, elegant in his Italian suit, seemed more relaxed than usual. Deborah, in a dark green dress that deliberately matched Eleanor's, supervised the final adjustments. "Girls, come here," Richard called upon seeing them. "You look stunning." There was a genuine tone of surprise and admiration in his voice, as if only at that moment did he realize his daughters were becoming women. For an instant his gaze took on a distant quality, and they both knew he was seeing Lucia in them. "Remember how to behave," Deborah intervened, breaking the moment. "Dr. Reynolds is a traditional man who values well-behaved young women. Speak only when spoken to, maintain an upright posture, and offer discreet smiles." The twins nodded, exchanging resigned glances. They were just pieces on Deborah's chessboard, strategically positioned to impress the important guest. At 8 p.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. Dr. Paul Reynolds, a 60-year-old man with perfectly trimmed grey hair and an imposing stature, was greeted effusively by Richard and Deborah. "And these must be your daughters," he said after the initial greetings. "Richard, you didn't exaggerate. They are truly charming. Isabel and Eleanor, our precious girls," Deborah introduced, with a proud smile that didn't reach her eyes. During dinner, the conversation flowed easily among the adults: business, politics, art, travel. The twins participated minimally, responding politely when questioned, exactly as they had been instructed. "So, girls," Dr. Reynolds said at one point, "your father tells me you are excellent students. Have you considered a career in business like him?" Before they could answer, Deborah interjected, "Isabel has an inclination for business administration, while Eleanor excels in the sciences." "Interesting," Dr. Reynolds commented, looking directly at the twins. "But I'd like to hear from them." A momentary silence fell. Isabel sensed the opportunity and seized it. "Actually, Dr. Reynolds, I'm interested in film and photography. Visual language has always fascinated me." Deborah's eyes narrowed dangerously, but she maintained her smile. "And you, Eleanor?" the guest asked, genuinely interested. I like literature," she replied shyly. "And visual arts, like my mother." The mention of Lucia caused a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Richard seemed momentarily shaken, while Deborah hurried to change the subject. "The girls are still exploring possibilities. There's plenty of time for definitive decisions." Certainly, Dr. Reynolds agreed, closely observing the family dynamic. But it's refreshing to see young people with their own ideas. The rest of the dinner proceeded without incident, but Isabel could feel the tension emanating from Deborah. She knew there would be consequences for her small act of rebellion, but somehow, the brief moment of genuine expression had been worth it. After dessert, while the adults retired to Richard's office to discuss business, the twins were dismissed. Seizing the opportunity, they discreetly made their way to Mrs. Wallace's room, located in a wing reserved for staff. The housekeeper was waiting for them, the photo album carefully placed on her simple but cozy bed. "Be quick, my flowers. I have to help with coffee after the meeting." For the next hour, the twins immersed themselves in the memories captured in those pages. Each photo was a treasure, a tangible connection to the mother they had lost so early. Lucia smiled in every picture, her eyes identical to Eleanor's, brimming with life and warmth. "She was so beautiful," Eleanor whispered, gently running her fingers over a photo where Lucia was holding them as babies. "And free," Isabel added. "Look at how she dressed, how she decorated the house, how she smiled without restraint. It was nothing like now," Eleanor completed with a deep sadness. On one of the last pages, they found something unexpected, an envelope containing a letter. The elegant, flowing handwriting was unmistakably Lucia's. "For my daughters when the time is right," Isabel read aloud, feeling her heart race. "Ellie, I think we should open it." Eleanor hesitated. "What if Deborah finds out?" "She'll never find out," Isabel assured her, already carefully opening the envelope. The letter, written on delicate paper that still preserved a faint scent of jasmine, Lucia's favorite fragrance, began with words that filled the twins' eyes with tears. "My beloved Isabel and Eleanor, if you are reading this letter, it is because I am no longer physically present to guide you, but I want you to know that my love transcends any absence, and that I am in some way always with you." The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted their reading. Quickly, Isabel folded the letter and hid it in the pocket of her dress. Mrs. Wallace entered hurriedly. "Quick, girls. Deborah is looking for you. The meeting is over, and Dr. Reynolds is leaving." With heavy hearts at having to interrupt that precious moment, but eager to continue reading later, the twins returned the album to Mrs. Wallace and hurried to the entrance hall, just in time to politely say goodbye to the guest. "It was a pleasure to get to know you better," Dr. Reynolds said, with a smile that seemed to carry an understanding beyond the words spoken. "Richard, you have an admirable family." After the guest's departure, Richard seemed pleased. "That was excellent. Paul is completely on board with the project." "The girls could have been more participative," Deborah criticized, "especially Eleanor, always so withdrawn." "I thought they behaved exactly as they should have," Richard replied, surprising everyone. Paul was impressed with them. A momentary silence fell, with Deborah clearly displeased at having her assessment challenged. "Well, I'm exhausted," Isabel said, taking the cue. "May we be excused, Dad?" Richard nodded. "Of course. Rest well. We'll talk more tomorrow." As they went up the stairs, Eleanor whispered, "The letter. Izzy, let's read it together in my room." "As soon as everyone is asleep," Isabel agreed, her heart racing with anticipation of what her mother's words written years ago might reveal. Chapter 4. The night advanced silently over the Ashford mansion. At 11:30 p.m., when all the staff had retired and silence dominated the corridors, Isabel slipped out of her room like a shadow. Barefoot, so as not to make a sound on the polished wooden floor, she covered the few feet to Eleanor's room. Her sister was waiting anxiously, sitting on the edge of the bed, a soft bedside lamp partially illuminating the room. Without a word, Isabel took the letter from her pocket and sat down beside her sister. "Ready?" she whispered. Eleanor nodded, moving closer so they could read together. With slightly trembling hands, Isabel unfolded the delicate paper and continued reading from where they had left off. "My beloved Isabel and Eleanor, if you are reading this letter, it is because I am no longer physically present to guide you, but I want you to know that my love transcends any absence and that I am in some way always with you. I am writing this letter a few days after receiving the diagnosis that changed everything. The doctors don't give me much hope, But I promised myself that I would use the time I have left to leave something of myself for you. Not just memories, but also guidance for the life you will have without my physical presence. I know your father better than anyone. Richard is a good man with a generous heart, but one who sometimes gets lost in the illusion that material success is the only way to show love. He will drown himself in work to cope with the pain of loss. That's how he has always faced difficulties. And in the process, I fear he may distance himself emotionally from you just when you will need him most. If this happens, please, do not judge him harshly. He will try to do what he believes is best for you, even if it is not what you truly need. And perhaps one day you will need to show him that a true legacy is not built in concrete and numbers, but in shared moments and expressed feelings. I do not know what woman your father will choose to be with after I am gone, or if he will choose anyone. I can only hope it is someone who understands the treasure that you two are, someone who respects each of your individualities, and nurtures not only your minds, but also your hearts. Isabel, my warrior with an indomitable spirit, I know you will feel the need to protect your sister. It is admirable, but remember that you also need to take care of yourself. Do not carry burdens beyond your strength. Eleanor, my sensitive dreamer, do not let your kindness be mistaken for weakness. There is a quiet strength in you, one that is not always visible to others, but that I have always seen. Trust in it. Together you are stronger. The bond between twins is something few understand. It is a connection that transcends the physical and the explainable. Nurture this bond, strengthen it, and never let anyone convince you that independence means separation. Always remember that true discipline comes not from fear or imposition, but from respect and love. Rules without affection are just cages. And you, my daughters, were born to fly. I ask that you show this letter to your father when you feel the time is right. Perhaps these will be the words he needs to hear to awaken. With all the love that exists in the universe and beyond, your mother, Lucia. When she finished reading, Isabel realized her face was wet with tears. Beside her, Eleanor was sobbing silently, her whole body trembling with emotion. It's like she knew, Eleanor murmured after a few moments. Like she foresaw everything. She knew Dad better than anyone, Isabel replied, drying her tears with the back of her hands. And she had a sensitivity that few understood. For several minutes, they remained in silence, absorbing their mother's words, feeling a closeness to her they hadn't experienced in years. What do we do now? Eleanor finally asked. Do we show it to Dad? Isabel thought for a moment. Not yet. We need the right moment when he's really ready to listen. And how will we know? We'll know, Isabel assured her, carefully folding the letter and tucking it inside a book of poetry on Eleanor's bookshelf, an unlikely hiding place, as Deborah considered poetry a needless distraction and rarely inspected that part of the room. That night, for the first time in a long time, Eleanor asked her sister to sleep in her room. As they did when they were little, they shared the queen-sized bed, finding comfort in each other's presence. Lucia's letter had awakened something in them, a renewed determination and a sense of purpose that had long been dormant under Deborah's regime. The next morning, Saturday dawned sunny, as if nature wanted to compensate for the previous day's rain. The twins came down for breakfast earlier than usual, surprising Mrs. Wallace in the kitchen. Good morning, my flowers. The housekeeper smiled. You're up early today. We have plans, Isabel replied with a sparkle in her eyes that Mrs. Wallace hadn't seen in a long time. Plans? On a Saturday? But Mrs. Deborah always schedules your studies for the weekends. Exactly, Isabel agreed. But today we're going to try something different. Mrs. Wallace looked at them with a mixture of concern and admiration. What are you two plotting? We just want to spend some time with our father, Eleanor explained. It's been so long since we've done something together, just the three of us. The housekeeper nodded understandingly. Your father is on the veranda having coffee and reading the paper. Mrs. Deborah left early for the salon and then has lunch with her friends from the club. Perfect, Isabel smiled. With cups of hot chocolate and freshly baked scones, a gift from Mrs. Wallace, the twins headed to the veranda. Richard looked up from his newspaper, surprised to see them. Good morning, girls. You're up early. Good morning, Dad, Isabel replied, sitting in the chair next to him. We have an idea. An idea? He repeated, intrigued by the excited tone in his daughter's voice. It's been years since we went to the beach together, Isabel began. And it's a perfect day. We thought we could go, just the three of us. Like before. Richard blinked, clearly caught off guard by the request. Well, I have some emails to answer, and a video conference at 2. The video conference can be rescheduled, Isabel argued. And the emails will always be there, Dad. But days like today with this sun are rare even in Miami. Please, Dad, Eleanor added, with those eyes that Richard had always found hard to refuse. Just for a few hours. He looked at his daughters, really looked, and something in him seemed to give way. You're right. It's been too long. Let's go to the beach. The joy on the twins' faces was like a ray of sunshine after months of winter. Richard couldn't help but smile in response, feeling a warmth in his chest he had forgotten existed. But what about Deborah? Eleanor asked, always cautious. Let me handle your stepmother, Richard replied with a firmness that surprised his daughters. Go get ready. We leave in 30 minutes. As the twins ran excitedly to their rooms, Richard remained seated, reflecting. There was something in Isabel's words that had struck a sensitive chord, like before. Before what exactly? Before Lucia's illness? Before his own obsession with work had become so all-consuming? Or before Deborah had taken almost total control of his daughter's upbringing? These questions bothered him, but he pushed them away. Today was a day to reconnect, not to question. An hour later, Richard was driving his convertible along the Miami coastline, with the twins in the back seat, their hair flying in the wind, genuine smiles on their faces. He chose a more secluded, less crowded beach where they could have some privacy. The day unfolded like an unexpected gift. They walked along the sand, talked about trivial things, laughed at simple jokes. Richard showed them how to make sandcastles, just as he did when they were little. They had lunch at a rustic beachside grill, savoring grilled shrimp and coconut water. It was during this lunch that Isabel, encouraged by the relaxed atmosphere, ventured a more personal question. Dad, do you remember the last time we came to the beach all together? Richard thought for a moment. It must have been shortly before your mother got sick, almost 6 years ago. Why did we never come back? Eleanor asked. The question hung in the air, laden with implicit meanings. Richard looked at the horizon, where the sea met the sky, before answering. Life took a different turn, I guess. After your mother passed, everything changed. But it didn't have to change so much, Isabel observed gently. We could have kept some family traditions. Richard looked at her with an expression that mixed guilt and recognition. You're right, I lost my way a little, girls, focusing so much on the future that I forgot to live in the present with you. It's never too late to start over. Eleanor smiled, placing her hand on her father's. That simple moment of genuine connection awakened something in Richard. It was as if a fog was beginning to lift, allowing him to see more clearly what had been right in front of him all along. At the end of the afternoon, on their way home, Richard received a call from Deborah. From the tone of the conversation, the twins could tell she was not happy about the unauthorized outing. However, to their surprise, Richard stood firm. Yes, Deborah, we're on our way. Yes, I know it's a study day, but the girls deserve some time to relax too. No, I didn't consult you because it was a spur-of-the-moment decision. We'll talk when I get home. When he hung up, he sighed. Your stepmother is a little upset. She always gets like that when she's not in control of everything. Isabel commented, more to herself than to her father. Richard looked at her in the rearview mirror with a thoughtful expression. She just wants what's best for you in her own way. Her way is to suffocate any joy or spontaneity, Isabel replied, unable to contain years of accumulated frustration. Isabel, Richard warned, but without the harsh tone he would normally use. Sorry, Dad, but it's true. When was the last time you saw us genuinely smile at home, or heard a spontaneous laugh during dinner? Our house feels more like a boarding school than a home. Richard didn't reply, but something in his eyes indicated that Isabel's words had hit a nerve. When they arrived at the mansion, Deborah was waiting for them at the entrance, arms crossed and a stern expression on her face. Without giving them a chance to explain, she immediately began to list the activities the twins had missed due to the irresponsible outing. The chemistry tutor came for the review session and had to leave. The study for the math Olympiad was completely neglected. And worst of all, Isabel's dress for next week's charity event needed alterations, and the seamstress came and went. Deborah, Richard interrupted with unusual, Firmness. Can we discuss this in private? She seemed surprised but nodded. Girls, to your rooms. Start your studies immediately to make up for lost time. The twins exchanged glances, hesitant to leave their father alone to face Deborah's wrath, but Richard gave them a reassuring gesture. Go on, it's all right. We'll talk later. In the office, Richard closed the door behind him, facing a clearly irritated Deborah. 5 years, Richard. 5 years building a solid educational routine for these girls, and you destroy it all in one day on a whim. It wasn't a whim, he replied calmly. It was a necessity. I realized today that I barely know my own daughters. You know them perfectly well, Deborah retorted. They are excellent students, polite, disciplined, but are they happy? Richard interrupted. When was the last time you saw them truly happy at home, Deborah? The question caught his stepmother off guard. Happiness is a subjective and volatile concept. We are building something more lasting. Character, discipline, excellence. At the cost of their youth, their spontaneity, their family connection. You're being dramatic, Deborah replied, changing tactics. It's just one day of missed studies. Tomorrow we'll go back to the normal routine. Richard sighed, feeling like he was hitting a wall. All right, but I want to start spending more time with the girls. Quality time, not just sitting at the table during dinner. As you wish, Deborah conceded with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Now we need to discuss next week's event. Isabel's dress. And so the conversation returned to the safe territory of social obligations and appearances. But something had changed in Richard. A small seed of doubt had been planted, and he couldn't stop thinking about Isabel's words about the house feeling more like a boarding school than a home. Meanwhile, in Isabel's room, the twins were talking in low voices. Did you see his face when I talked about the house being like a boarding school? Isabel commented. I think he's finally starting to see. Or maybe we're seeing what we want to see, Eleanor pondered, always more cautious. Deborah has enormous power over him. But it's not unshakable, Isabel argued. Today was proof of that. He chose us, Ellie. He chose to spend time with us instead of working or obeying her rules. It was just one day, Eleanor sighed. Tomorrow everything will go back to normal. Not necessarily, Isabel replied with a determined glint in her eyes. What if we keep going? What if we find other ways to show him what our life is like under Deborah's regime? Eleanor looked at her sister with a mixture of admiration and fear. What are you planning, Izzy? I think it's time we started making some things more visible to Dad, Isabel answered. The little cruelties, the excessive punishments, the way she tries to control and separate us. That's dangerous, Eleanor warned. She'll realize what we're doing. Maybe. But I also think it's time to show Dad Mom's letter. Eleanor's eyes widened. Are you sure? What if he gets angry that we hid it from him? He needs to read those words, Ellie. He needs to remember what Mom valued, what she hoped for us. The letter could be the awakening he needs. Before they could continue their conversation, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Quickly, Eleanor ran to her own room, while Isabel picked up a book and pretended to study. The door opened, and to Isabel's surprise, it was Richard, not Deborah, who entered. Dad? She asked, closing the book. Richard smiled, looking a bit out of place, as if he didn't know exactly what to do there. I just wanted to thank you for today. It was important to me. For us too, Isabel replied sincerely. And I wanted to say that, well, I'm going to try to be more present. I've realized I've been very absent in your lives. Isabel felt a wave of hope. That would be amazing, Dad. Richard came closer, sitting on the edge of the bed. Isabel, what you said in the car about the house feeling like a boarding school, is that how you really feel? It was the moment of truth Isabel had been waiting for. She could soften it, downplay it as she always did to avoid confrontation. Or she could be honest and risk the fragile connection they had rebuilt that day. She chose honesty. Yes, Dad, that's exactly how we feel most of the time. Rules upon rules, constant surveillance, no space to just be teenagers. Richard seemed genuinely disturbed. I didn't know. I thought the discipline was necessary, that the structure would be beneficial. Structure is one thing. Dad, what we live here is something else entirely. He was silent for a moment, processing his daughter's words. I'll pay more attention, Isabel. I promise. When Richard left, Isabel felt that something fundamental had shifted. A small victory, perhaps, but a significant one. Her father was finally beginning to see beyond the impeccable facade Deborah had constructed. That night, as the Ashford mansion prepared for sleep, 4 people remained awake, each lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor, in her room, reread her mother's letter, finding strength in the words that had traveled through time to reach her. Isabel planned their next steps, determined not to lose the momentum they had gained. Richard, in his office, looked at old family photographs, noticing for the first time the stark contrast between the spontaneous smiles of the past and the carefully rehearsed smiles of the present. And Deborah, at her vanity, watched her own reflection in the mirror as she mentally plotted strategies to regain the control she felt was slipping away. The storm was gathering silently. It was only a matter of time before it broke. Chapter 5. The following week brought subtle but noticeable changes to the routine at the Ashford mansion. Richard, keeping his promise, began to come home earlier, participating more actively in dinner and even attending one of the twins' piano lessons. For Isabel and Eleanor, these small gestures were rays of hope amidst the constant oppression. Deborah, for her part, intensified her surveillance, as if she felt her control slipping through her fingers. Her orders became stricter, her criticisms sharper, and her gaze more calculating. It was a tense and silent dance, where each participant carefully measured their steps. On Wednesday, during breakfast, Richard surprised everyone with an announcement. "I've booked tickets for the Adrian Arsh Center on Saturday night," he said casually, while spreading jam on a piece of toast. "There's a performance by the Florida Philharmonic Orchestra. I thought we could go as a family." The twins' eyes shone with restrained excitement, while Deborah slowly set down her teacup. "Saturday?" she questioned with a tense smile. "Richard, have you forgotten it's the day of the math competition? The girls have been registered for months." Richard frowned. "I don't remember seeing that on the calendar." "It's there," Deborah insisted, pulling out her tablet and showing him the meticulously recorded entry. "State mathematics competition, 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. Richard looked disappointed. "I see. I didn't know." "We can go to the theater another day," Eleanor suggested quickly, trying to diffuse the tension. Isabel, however, was not willing to give in so easily. "Actually, I think only I am registered for the competition. Ellie could go to the theater with Dad." Deborah shot her an icy glare. "You are both registered, Isabel. Don't make things up." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Richard looked from Deborah to Isabel, clearly unsure who was telling the truth. "I'll check with the school," he said finally. "If only Isabel is registered, Eleanor can join me." Deborah smiled with false sweetness. "Of course, dear. Do that." Later, as the twins were getting ready for school, Eleanor confronted her sister in her room. "You know we're both registered for the competition, Izzy. Why did you lie?" Isabel closed the door, making sure they wouldn't be overheard. "I didn't lie. I cancelled your registration 2 weeks ago, after you had that anxiety attack because of the pressure." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You what?" "But how?" "I sent an email to the coordinator using Deborah's login. I said you were having health issues and couldn't participate." "Izzy, that's crazy." "If Deborah finds out—" "That's exactly what I want," Isabel interrupted, determination shining in her eyes. "I want Dad to find out that she lied. It's the perfect opportunity for him to start questioning the control she has over us." Eleanor sat on the bed, shaken. "This is going to go wrong, Izzy. She always comes out on top. Always." "Not this time," Isabel assured her, holding her sister's hands. "Trust me, Ellie. We need to be strategic." At school, during break, Leo found Isabel in the library studying alone. "Hey, Rebel," he joked, sitting next to her. "How's Operation Free Yourself from the Evil Stepmother going?" Isabel smiled despite the tension. Leo had become her confidant in recent days, the only person outside the mansion who knew parts of her plan. "We're making progress," she replied in a low voice. "But every step is like walking through a minefield. Have you shown your dad your mother's letter yet?" "Not yet. I'm waiting for the right moment. I need him to already be questioning Deborah when he reads those words." Leo nodded understandingly. "And how's your sister handling all this?" "She's scared but determined. Ellie has always been the more sensitive of us, the one who suffers most under Deborah's regime. But she's also stronger. Then she looks. What about that party at Jessica's on Saturday? Leo asked, changing the subject. Still thinking about going? Isabel bit her lip, undecided. I don't know. If the theater plan works out, Ellie will be with my dad. I'm supposed to be at the math competition. Or you could sneak out and live a little, Leo suggested with a mischievous smile. I can pick you up at the corner of the school at 7 p.m. No one will notice you're gone at the competition. There are dozens of participants. The proposal was tempting. A night of freedom, of teenage normalcy, away from Deborah's oppressive gaze. I'll think about it, Isabel promised. In the afternoon, when Richard stopped by the school to pick up his daughters, another new habit he had recently established, he took the opportunity to talk to the coordinator about the math competition. Yes, Mr. Ashford, Isabel is confirmed. Eleanor, however, was removed from the list of participants 2 weeks ago. We received an email informing us that she was having health issues. Richard frowned. An email from whom? From Mrs. Deborah, if I'm not mistaken. Let me check. Yes, here it is. The coordinator showed him the email in question, and Richard felt a wave of unease. Why would Deborah lie about something so easily verifiable? On the way home, he remained silent, processing the information. In the back seat, the twins exchanged nervous glances. Is everything okay, Dad? Eleanor finally asked. Richard watched her in the rearview mirror. I stopped by the school to confirm about Saturday's competition. It seems only Isabel is registered. You were removed from the list 2 weeks ago. Eleanor looked down, not knowing how to respond. The coordinator showed me an email, supposedly from Deborah, cancelling your participation. But your stepmother insisted at breakfast that you were both registered. The silence in the car was palpable. Richard sighed, parking in front of the mansion. Girls, I need you to be honest with me. What is really going on? Isabel took the initiative. Deborah said Ellie was registered because she didn't want you to take either of us to the theater. She doesn't like it when we do things without her, especially with you. Richard looked at Eleanor, seeking confirmation. Is that true, Eleanor? She nodded slightly, her eyes welling up. Yes, Dad. Deborah controls everything we do, even when and how we can spend time with you. It was as if a door opened in Richard's mind, allowing him to see fragments of a pattern that had been in front of him for years, but that he had never truly seen. Why did you never tell me this? He asked, his voice a mix of confusion and guilt. We tried several times, Isabel replied, but you were always too busy or you believed her version of things. Richard remained silent for a long moment. I see. Well, it looks like we have plans for Saturday, Eleanor. Theatre at 8 p.m. As they entered the house, they found Deborah in the hall, checking the newly installed decorations for the following week's charity event. You're back, she smiled, immediately noticing Richard's serious expression. Is there a problem? We'll talk later, he replied curtly, heading up the stairs without further explanation. Deborah turned to the twins, her smile instantly vanishing. What did you tell him? Just the truth, Isabel replied, holding her stepmother's gaze. That Eleanor hasn't been registered for the competition for 2 weeks, and that you lied about it. Deborah's face hardened. To your rooms now. No dinner for you tonight. I doubt Dad would agree with that, Isabel retorted, a boldness she would never have shown before. Your father is not in charge of your upbringing. I am, Deborah hissed, leaning in closer. And I suggest you remember that before the situation gets worse for both of you. The twins went up the stairs in silence, but there was something different in their steps. It was no longer the defeated submission of before, but a quiet determination. The balance of power was shifting, and everyone in the house could feel it. That night, contrary to Deborah's order, Richard insisted that his daughters join them for dinner. The meal passed in tense silence, with Deborah maintaining an artificial smile, while casting furtive glances at the twins. So, Richard said finally, I confirmed with the school that only Isabel will be participating in the competition on Saturday. Eleanor and I will be going to the theater. How strange, Deborah replied with feigned surprise. I must have gotten the information mixed up. With so many commitments to manage. Yes, that must have been it, Richard agreed, his tone making it clear he didn't believe her. By the way, Isabel, would you like to go to the theater as well? Before Isabel could answer, Deborah intervened. Richard, Isabel needs to be at the competition. It's important for her academic career. "I'm asking my daughter, Deborah," he replied firmly. "Isabel, what would you prefer?" Everyone at the table seemed surprised by Richard's unusual assertiveness. Isabel hesitated, torn between the desire to accompany her father and sister, and the opportunity for freedom that skipping the competition would afford her. "I think I should participate in the competition," she replied finally. "I've prepared for it." What she didn't say was that she had also arranged to go to the party with Leo afterward. "As you wish," Richard nodded, clearly respecting her decision. "But know that the choice is yours." After dinner, while the twins were helping Mrs. Wallace with the dishes, they heard raised voices coming from the office. Richard and Deborah were arguing, a rare occurrence in the mansion. "They're fighting because of us," Eleanor whispered, worried. "It's what we needed," Isabel replied. "Dad is finally starting to see the truth." Later, when the house was quiet, Mrs. Wallace knocked gently on the door of Isabel's room. "Where the twins were talking. My flowers," the housekeeper said in a low voice. "I thought you should know. The argument in the office was bad. Your father questioned Mrs. Deborah's educational methods, especially the punishments and the isolation." "And what happened?" Eleanor asked anxiously. "Mrs. Deborah managed to calm him down, as always, but he's different this time, more firm. He said he wants to be more actively involved in your upbringing from now on." The twins exchanged hopeful glances. "And there's more," Mrs. Wallace continued, closing the door behind her. "I heard Mrs. Deborah on the phone afterward. She was talking to someone about a boarding school in Switzerland." The girl's blood ran cold. "Boarding school," Isabel repeated, incredulous. "She said it would be the perfect solution for the current problem, that you need professional discipline and distance from bad influences." "She can't do that," Eleanor protested, her voice trembling. "Dad would never agree." "Don't underestimate her persuasiveness," Mrs. Wallace warned. "She has her methods. I'm just letting you know so you can be prepared." After Mrs. Wallace left, the twins remained silent for a long moment, the threat of boarding school hanging over them like a dark cloud. "This changes everything," Isabel said finally. "We can't wait any longer. We have to show Dad the letter immediately." Eleanor agreed, retrieving the book of poetry where they had hidden Lucia's letter. "When?" "Tomorrow. I'll ask to speak with him alone, before Deborah has a chance to move forward with the boarding school plan." The next day, however, Deborah seemed to have anticipated their intentions. She announced at breakfast that Richard had unexpectedly traveled to New York City for an emergency meeting with investors. "He sends his love and said he'll be back on Friday night. In time for the weekend's commitments," she informed them, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The twins exchanged suspicious glances. It was all too convenient that Richard had traveled just as the tension at home was escalating. Over the next 2 days, Deborah implemented an even more rigorous regime. Tutoring sessions were intensified, free time was practically eliminated, and even meals became more controlled, with measured portions and timed schedules. "She's trying to break us before Dad gets back," Isabel commented to Eleanor on Thursday night, as they studied in the library under the supervision of a tutor specially hired by Deborah. "That, or wear us out so much that we won't have the energy to resist the boarding school plan," Eleanor whispered in response. On Friday, during chemistry class, Isabel received a text message from Leo. "Confirmed for tomorrow. I'll pick you up at 7 p.m. at the usual spot." She hesitated for a moment, thinking about everything that was at stake. If she got caught at the party, Deborah would have the perfect ammunition to convince Richard about the boarding school. On the other hand, if she managed to go without being discovered, it would be a small victory, a moment of hard-won freedom. "Yes," she finally replied. "I'll be there." In the afternoon, Richard returned from New York City looking tired but satisfied. "We managed to close the deal," he announced at dinner. "The resort will have international financing. That means I'll be able to reduce my workload soon." "What wonderful news, dear," Deborah smiled, though her tone did not reflect genuine enthusiasm. "Perhaps this is the perfect time to discuss the girls' educational plans for next year." Richard looked at her curiously. "What plans?" "I was researching some options to enhance their education," Deborah replied casually. "There's an excellent boarding school in Switzerland with an international curriculum and top-tier teachers." The silence that followed was heavy. The twins watched their father anxiously, trying to read his reaction. "Boarding school? Richard repeated, frowning. That seems like a rather drastic decision. Why would we send the girls so far away? To ensure they have the best possible education, of course, Deborah replied smoothly. Besides, it would help eliminate certain distractions that have been harming their performance lately. What distractions? Richard questioned, his gaze turning to his daughters. They have the best grades in their class. It's not just about grades, dear. It's about character building, discipline, preparing them for the world. And frankly, I've noticed certain negative influences here in Miami. Questionable friendships, defiant attitudes. Isabel felt her blood boil. Defiant attitudes like wanting to spend time with our own father, or questioning irrational rules. You see what I mean? Deborah sighed as if Isabel's words proved her point. This rebelliousness is not healthy. Richard remained silent, his gaze shifting from Deborah to his daughters. I think we need to discuss this more calmly. For now, we'll stick to the current plans. Tomorrow, Eleanor and I are going to the theater, and Isabel to the competition. The subject of boarding school was temporarily closed, but the twins knew Deborah wouldn't give up easily. After dinner, Isabel asked to speak with her father in private, seeing the perfect opportunity to show him Lucia's letter. Dad, there's something important I need to show you, she began, once they were alone in the office. But before she could continue, they were interrupted by Deborah, who entered the room without knocking. Sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Paul Reynolds just called. He's in town for a conference and would like to meet with you tomorrow afternoon, Richard. Richard seemed surprised. Tomorrow, but I have plans with Eleanor. He stressed the importance of the meeting. Something about new foreign investors interested in the resort, Deborah insisted, her tone making it clear the opportunity was too big to pass up. Isabel watched her father's hesitation, and her heart sank. Even with all the promises of change, business was still his priority. We can reschedule the theater for another day, suggested Eleanor, who had appeared at the office door. Or maybe I can go with Izzy after the competition. Richard looked at his daughters, clearly torn. No, we're not rescheduling. Dr. Reynolds will have to understand that I have a family commitment. The surprise on Deborah's face was almost comical. Richard, you can't be serious. This meeting could mean millions for the resort. And this commitment means much more to me and my daughters, he replied firmly. Schedule a breakfast meeting with Paul for Sunday, if he's still in town. Otherwise, we'll have to meet when I'm in New York next week. It was a moment of triumph for the twins. For the first time in years, Richard had clearly chosen his family over business. Now, he continued, turning back to Isabel, you had something to show me? Isabel hesitated, noticing Deborah's calculating gaze. We can talk about it tomorrow, Dad. It's not urgent. The truth was, she wanted to show him the letter in a moment of complete privacy, without Deborah's watchful presence. And, more importantly, she wanted to be sure her father was truly ready to hear Lucia's words. That night, as they prepared for bed, Eleanor expressed her concern about Isabel's plan for the party. It's too risky. Izzy, especially now that Deborah is talking about boarding school. If you get caught... I won't, Isabel assured her, though she wasn't as confident as she tried to sound. I need this, Ellie. One night of normalcy, of freedom. Besides, I already promised Leo, Eleanor sighed. Just be careful, very careful. On Saturday, the day unfolded as planned. Isabel left early for the math competition, accompanied by Deborah, who insisted on personally supervising her participation. Richard and Eleanor spent the day together, having lunch at a beachside restaurant and then visiting an art exhibition at the Perez Art Museum, Miami. At 6:30 p.m., after the competition, Isabel convinced Deborah to drop her off at the school for a study session with classmates. I'll pick you up at 9 p.m., Deborah informed her. Not a minute later. Deal, Isabel agreed, crossing her fingers mentally. As soon as Deborah's car disappeared around the corner, Isabel ran to the meeting spot with Leo. He was already waiting for her on his motorcycle, a wide smile on his face. Ready for your night of freedom? He asked, handing her a helmet. Isabel smiled, feeling a mix of adrenaline and fear, more than ever. Meanwhile, at the Adrian Arsht Center, Richard and Eleanor were enjoying the performance by the Philharmonic Orchestra. For Eleanor, it was a precious moment, finally alone with her father, without Deborah's oppressive presence, free to simply be herself. At Jessica's party, Isabel was experiencing a freedom she hadn't known in years. The loud music, the casual conversations, the laughter without fear of reprimand. It all felt surreal after so long living under strict rules. "You seem like a different person," Leo commented, watching her dance freely. "I feel like a different person," she confessed, smiling. "Like I can finally breathe." Time flew by, and before she knew it, it was 8:45 p.m. Isabel checked her watch with alarm. "I have to go. Leo, Deborah is picking me up at 9 p.m. at the school." "Are you sure?" "The party's just getting started," he protested. "I can't risk it." "If she finds out I lied," Leo nodded understandingly. "Let's go then." They left in a hurry, but the rain that had started to fall made visibility on the road difficult. Leo drove carefully, but they were still taking longer than expected. "We're not going to make it in time." Isabel worried, watching the clock tick past 8:58 p.m. "I'll try a shortcut," Leo decided, turning onto a side street. At that same moment, Deborah arrived at the school punctually at 9 p.m. When she didn't find Isabel at the agreed-upon spot, her unease quickly turned to anger. She called her stepdaughter's cell phone several times, but every call went to voicemail. After 15 minutes of waiting, she decided to go home. Perhaps Isabel had gone with a classmate and was already there. But upon arriving, she found that she wasn't. The house was empty, except for Mrs. Wallace, who was preparing to end her shift. "Has Miss Isabel returned yet?" the housekeeper asked, concerned. "No," Deborah replied curtly, "and when she does show up, she will deeply regret having lied to me." At the theater, the show had ended, and Richard and Eleanor were leaving, chatting excitedly about the performance. "Your mother loved classical music," Richard commented with a nostalgic smile. "We used to come here almost every month when we were dating." "Really? I never knew that," Eleanor replied, fascinated by this glimpse into her parents' past. "There are a lot of things about your mother you don't know," Richard sighed. "I think I've been negligent in keeping her memory alive." "It's never too late to start," Eleanor smiled gently. At that moment, Richard's phone rang. It was Deborah, her voice tense on the other end of the line. "Richard, Isabel is missing. I went to pick her up from school as we arranged, but she wasn't there. I've called every study partner I know and no one has seen her." Richard's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, missing? Did you two argue? Could she have gone to a friend's house?" "We didn't argue," Deborah replied, her tone now laced with concern. "But you know how rebellious she's been lately. I'm afraid she's done something reckless." Eleanor, sensing that something was wrong, watched her father anxiously. When he hung up, his face was pale. "What happened?" she asked, fearing the answer. "Your sister is missing," Richard replied, already walking quickly to the parking garage. "We're going home. We need to find her." Meanwhile, Leo and Isabel were racing against time. The rain had worsened, turning what should have been a quick trip into a slow and dangerous journey. "We're almost there," Leo encouraged, turning the last corner before the school. But when they arrived, the place was deserted. There was no sign of Deborah's car. "She's already gone," Isabel stated, panic rising in her voice. "I'm in so much trouble." "Calm down, let's think," Leo urged. "You can say you were in the library and lost track of time. Or that your phone died and that's why you didn't answer her calls." "Deborah would never believe that," Isabel replied, feeling increasingly desperate. "She's probably already called all my study partners." "What if I take you straight home? The faster you get there, the less time she'll have to come up with theories." Isabel nodded, seeing no other alternative. "Let's go then." As they headed to the Ashford mansion, Richard and Eleanor were also arriving home. The atmosphere was one of absolute tension, with Deborah pacing back and forth in the living room, the phone glued to her ear. "I just spoke with 2 more of her classmates," she informed Richard as she saw him. "No one knows anything. We should call the police." "Let's wait a little longer," Richard decided, trying to stay calm. She might be on her way. Eleanor, feeling there was more to the story, discreetly pulled her father aside. "Dad, I think I know what might have happened. Isabel mentioned something about a party at Jessica's house tonight." "A party?" Richard repeated, surprised. "Why didn't she tell us?" "Because Deborah would never allow it," Eleanor replied in a low voice. "And after all the pressure of the last few days, I think she just wanted a moment of normalcy." Richard processed the information, a mixture of concern and understanding in his eyes. "I see, but she should have been honest with me at least. At that moment, the sound of an approaching motorcycle caught everyone's attention. Through the window, they saw Isabel getting off the back of a motorcycle, quickly saying goodbye to Leo and running to the door. When she entered, she found 3 pairs of eyes fixed on her. Deborah's furious, Richard's a mixture of relief and disappointment, and Eleanor's simply relieved. "Where were you?" Deborah asked, her voice as sharp as a blade. Isabel hesitated, knowing that any lie would be easily exposed. "At Jessica's birthday party." The silence that followed was deafening. Deborah looked at Richard with an expression that clearly said, "I told you so," while Eleanor watched the scene with apprehension. "To your room now," Deborah ordered. "We will discuss this tomorrow when I am calmer." "No," Richard intervened, to everyone's surprise. "We're going to discuss this now, as a family." His words were like a ray of hope for the twins. Perhaps finally the truth about their lives under Deborah's control would come to light. Or perhaps they were about to face the biggest storm they had ever weathered together. Chapter 6. The silence in the living room of the Ashford mansion was almost palpable. Richard had ordered everyone to sit for a family discussion, something that hadn't happened in years. Isabel remained standing, still wet from the rain, drops dripping from her hair onto the imported Persian rug, a detail that did not escape Deborah's critical gaze. "Sit down, Isabel," Richard said, gesturing to the sofa next to Eleanor. Deborah occupied a separate armchair, her back straight, chin slightly raised, the posture of someone preparing for a battle she already considered won. "First of all," Richard began, "I'm relieved you're safe, Isabel. We were all very worried." "Some more than others," Isabel muttered, casting a suspicious glance at Deborah. "Sarcasm won't help you," Deborah chided. "You lied, disobeyed explicit rules, and made us worry. That is unacceptable." "I agree that the lying was wrong," Richard intervened. "But I want to understand why you felt you had to lie, Isabel. Why didn't you ask for permission to go to the party?" Isabel let out a bitter laugh. "Seriously, Dad, when was the last time we were allowed to do anything normal, anything that ordinary teenagers do? Parties, movies with friends, a simple trip to the mall without supervision. Everything is forbidden or rigidly controlled." "There are good reasons for that," Deborah defended herself. "The world is not safe for naive and easily influenced young women. Just look at what happened today. You got on the back of a motorcycle with a boy we barely know in the middle of a storm." "Leo isn't a stranger. He's been my friend for years," Isabel protested. "And I know him much better than you do, because you've never bothered to get to know any of our real friends." Richard held up his hands, asking for calm. "Let's stick to the facts, please. Isabel, you know that lying was wrong. Deborah, you need to understand that the girls are growing up and need a certain amount of freedom." "Freedom with responsibility," Deborah corrected. "Something Isabel is clearly not ready to handle, and this only proves my point about boarding school. A structured environment, away from negative influences, is exactly what she needs." Upon hearing the words boarding school, Richard frowned. "We haven't decided anything about that yet." "What?" intervened Eleanor, who had remained silent until then. "Are you really considering sending us away?" Richard looked at his daughter, surprised by her tone. "Your stepmother mentioned the possibility, but it's just an idea under discussion." "It's not just an idea," Isabel corrected, her voice laced with bitterness. "Deborah is already making the arrangements. We heard her on the phone." Richard turned to Deborah, confusion evident on his face. "Is this true?" Deborah was unfazed. "I was merely making some preliminary inquiries. As the manager of the girls' education, it is my responsibility to explore all options." "Manager of our education?" Isabel repeated, unable to contain her indignation. "Is that how you see yourself? As a manager and not as a mother?" Deborah completed with a cold smile. "I never intended to replace Lucia, dear. My role has always been to ensure you had the best possible upbringing, not to be your friend or confidant." "And that's why you treat us like prisoners?" Eleanor questioned, finding a courage she rarely showed. "Why you control every minute of our day, every person we speak to, every book we read?" Richard watched the exchange with growing discomfort. "Girls, I think you're exaggerating. I know Deborah can be strict, but No, Dad, you don't know, Isabel interrupted, standing up. You have no idea what happens when you're not home. Richard, they are clearly emotional, Deborah said, maintaining her studied calm. Perhaps we should continue this conversation in the morning. No, Isabel exclaimed. No more postponing, no more pretending everything is fine. Dad, do you really think it's normal that we have no friends visit our house? That every minute of our day is timed? That we are punished for small mistakes with food deprivation or humiliation? Food deprivation? Richard repeated, his gaze now fixed on Deborah. She's exaggerating, Deborah replied quickly. Occasionally, the girls are sent to their rooms without dinner as a consequence of inappropriate behavior. It's a common disciplinary practice. It's not just that, Isabel continued. Last week, when Eleanor spilled juice on the music room rug, Deborah made her clean the floor on her knees in front of the piano teacher and then forbade her from playing for a week. Richard turned to Eleanor. Is this true? Eleanor nodded, silent tears streaming down her face. It was so humiliating, Dad. The teacher was embarrassed, and I felt like nothing, like less than nothing. Richard's expression transformed. For the first time in years, he seemed to be truly seeing his daughters, not as extensions of his success, not as projects under development, but as young women suffering under a regime he, in his emotional absence, had allowed to take hold. Why did you never tell me? He asked, his voice low and heavy with guilt. We tried several times, Isabel replied, but you were always too busy or too tired, or you trusted Deborah's judgment too much. Or she intercepted our attempts, Eleanor added. Remember when I asked to speak with you alone on my 15th birthday? Deborah said I had changed my mind, that it was just some silly thing about a dress, but I wanted to tell you how unhappy we were. Richard ran a hand through his hair, visibly disturbed. I didn't know, I didn't realize. Of course you didn't realize, Deborah interjected, her voice now icy. You were too busy building that resort, closing that deal, traveling to New York, to Chicago, to Europe. You left your daughter's upbringing entirely in my hands, and now you want to question my methods? I'm questioning your methods because they seem to have caused more harm than good, Richard retorted, an unusual firmness in his voice. Discipline is one thing, Deborah. Tyranny is something else entirely. Tyranny? She repeated with a laugh of disbelief. Is that how you see my years of effort to turn your daughters into strong, educated women prepared for the world? Look at the results. Excellent grades, multiple skills, impeccable posture, and deep unhappiness, Richard completed. Constant fear and absence of joy. Don't you see that something fundamental is missing? Deborah stood up, her eyes as cold as ice. What these girls lack is gratitude. Gratitude for the roof over their heads, for the first-class education, for the opportunities that few young people have. Gratitude? Isabel questioned. It's hard to feel gratitude when you live in fear. Fear is a part of life, Deborah retorted. The world out there is cruel, unforgiving. I am merely preparing you for that reality. It's not your place to decide that, Richard interrupted, his voice surprisingly firm. They are my daughters. I should have been more present, more attentive. I should have realized what was happening. A heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, the rain fell harder, the sound of the water against the windows creating a somber soundtrack to the family drama. I think it's time to rethink some aspects of our family dynamic, Richard continued after a moment, starting with the idea of boarding school, which is officially off the table. Deborah's eyes narrowed. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious, he replied, looking directly at her. And starting tomorrow, I'm going to work fewer hours. I want to be more actively involved in my daughters' lives. Richard, Deborah's tone was a warning, don't make rash decisions based on the emotional accusations of rebellious teenagers. They are not just accusations, Deborah, Eleanor intervened, her voice surprisingly firm. We have something to show Dad, something we found recently that might help him better understand what Mom hoped for us. Isabel looked at her sister, surprised by her initiative, but quickly understood. The letter. Eleanor nodded and, without waiting for approval, ran to her room, returning moments later with the envelope, now slightly yellowed with time. With trembling hands, she handed it to her father. What is this? Richard asked, looking confused at the envelope. A letter that Mom wrote before she passed, Eleanor explained. We found it in the attic, along with old photos. Richard examined the envelope, immediately recognizing Lucia's handwriting. For my daughters when the time is right, he read in a low voice. We believe the time is now, Dad, Isabel said gently. Carefully, as if handling something precious and fragile, Richard opened the envelope and unfolded the pages inside. As he read his late wife's words, his face underwent a transformation. Surprise, pain, understanding, and finally, determination. The room remained in absolute silence as he read. When he finished, he carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, his eyes moist with restrained tears. She knew, he said finally, his voice almost a whisper. Even then she knew how I would react, how I would bury myself in work, how I could lose sight of what truly matters. He turned to his daughters, an expression of deep regret on his face. I am so sorry for failing you, for not honoring your mother's wish that you be raised with love and understanding, not just with rules and discipline. Deborah, who had watched the scene with growing tension, intervened. Richard, don't let yourself be manipulated by a letter written years ago, in a completely different context. Lucia couldn't have predicted how the girls would develop, what challenges we would face. She predicted exactly what would happen, Richard retorted, his voice now firm. She predicted I would lose myself in work, that I might confuse material success with love. And she was right. He turned back to his daughters. Starting today, things are going to change in this house. I don't know exactly how yet, but I promise they will be changes for the better. Isabel and Eleanor looked at each other, a mixture of hope and disbelief on their faces. It was almost too good to be true. After years of living under Deborah's oppressive regime, their father was finally seeing the truth. Richard, Deborah's voice cut through the moment, I suggest we continue this conversation tomorrow, when we are all calmer and more rational. No, Deborah, he replied firmly. This conversation has waited too long, years too long. He stood up, facing his wife directly. You and I need to talk in private. Girls, please, go to your rooms. I promise that tomorrow we will start making the necessary changes. The twins hesitated, reluctant to leave their father alone with Deborah. It will be all right, Richard assured them, sensing their concern. Trust me. With one last look at Deborah, whose face was now a mask of cold restraint, the twins left the room and went upstairs. In the hallway between their rooms, they stopped to talk. Do you think he's really going to change things? Eleanor asked, hope and fear battling in her voice. He seemed different this time, Isabel replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. More decisive, more present. I think Mum's letter really got to him. But Deborah is so persuasive, Eleanor observed. She always manages to convince him of anything. Not this time, Isabel stated, holding her sister's hand. He saw something today, Ellie. He saw the truth about our life here, and Mum's letter came at the perfect moment to solidify that perception. From downstairs they began to hear raised voices. The argument between Richard and Deborah was escalating. Isolated words reached them. Manipulation, control, abuse, ingratitude. Should we do something? Eleanor asked, worried. No, Isabel replied. Dad needs to face this alone. It's part of his process of finally stepping up. Reluctantly, they separated, each going to her own room, but neither of them would be able to sleep any time soon. The night's events had been too intense. Emotions were raw, and the uncertainty about the future hung in the air like the storm that continued to batter Miami. In Eleanor's room, the young woman sat on the edge of her bed, hugging an old teddy bear, a gift from Lucia on her 5th birthday, one of the few personal items Deborah had allowed her to keep visible. She closed her eyes, trying to imagine what life would be like from now on. Would there be more freedom, more joy? Would the constant pressure be lifted? And most importantly, could her father really break free from Deborah's influence? In the KT room next door, Isabel stared at the rain through the window, her thoughts in a whirlwind. She had risked so much that night, going to the party, the direct confrontation, revealing the letter. But for the first time in years, she felt that the pieces were moving in her favor. It wouldn't be easy. Deborah wouldn't give up without a fight. But a first crucial step had been taken. Downstairs the argument continued. The voices sometimes rose, sometimes dropped to tense whispers. What was clear, even from a distance, was that something fundamental was being decided in that room, the future of the Ashford family hanging by a thread. Around midnight, silence finally fell over the house. The twins, still awake, heard footsteps coming up the stairs. A single set of footsteps they recognized. Moments later, a light knock sounded on Isabel's door. "May I come in?" Richard asked, his voice tired but determined. Isabel opened the door, immediately noticing her father's red eyes and his exhausted expression. "Are you okay?" He tried to smile, but the result was more an expression of restrained pain. "Can we talk? You and Eleanor?" Isabel nodded, heading to her sister's room to call her. Minutes later, the three of them were sitting on the edge of Isabel's bed, a heavy silence between them. "First," Richard began, "I want to apologize to you both, a deep and sincere apology. I have failed as a father, allowing you to grow up in an environment of fear and excessive control." "Dad," Eleanor started, but he held up a hand asking to continue. "No, let me finish. It's important that I say this. After your mother passed, I lost myself. The pain was unbearable, and I buried myself in work as a form of escape. I believed that by ensuring your financial security, I was fulfilling my role as a father. And in the process, I delegated responsibilities to Deborah that were mine." He paused, taking a deep breath. Lucia's letter. It was like hearing her voice again after all these years, and she was right about every word. "I distanced myself emotionally when you needed me most. I allowed the void she left to be filled by something cold and controlling, instead of the love and understanding you deserved." Tears were now streaming freely down Eleanor's face, and even Isabel, always more reserved, felt a lump in her throat. "What's going to happen now?" Isabel asked, finally voicing the question they both feared to ask. Richard took a deep breath before answering. "I have asked Deborah to leave this house, temporarily at least. We need space to rebuild our family, to reconnect as a father and daughters." The twins looked at each other, surprised by the firmness of his decision. "Did she agree?" Eleanor asked, doubtful. "Not without resistance," Richard admitted. "But I made it clear that it's not a suggestion, it's a decision. She's packing some things now and we'll go to the apartment we keep downtown." "And after that," Isabel insisted, still wary of this unexpected victory. "After that, we start over, as a family. I know it won't be easy, that there's a lot of trust to rebuild between us, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes, including drastically reducing my work hours." "Really?" Eleanor asked, a small smile lighting up her face for the first time that night. "Absolutely. The resort is practically finished, and I have a competent team that can take on more responsibilities. You two will be my priority from now on." There was a moment of silence, the three people in the room processing the magnitude of the announced changes. Then, in a spontaneous gesture, Eleanor moved forward and hugged her father, followed shortly by Isabel. The three of them remained, like that, embraced, their tears mingling, the pain of years of distance slowly beginning to dissipate. "I've missed you both so much," Richard whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "Even living in the same house, I felt like we were worlds apart." "We missed you too, Dad," Eleanor replied. When they finally separated, something had changed in the air between them. A connection that had been severely damaged was beginning to mend, still fragile, but with the potential to grow stronger. "I have one more thing to show you," Richard said, taking something from his jacket pocket. "I found this in the office, stored in a drawer I rarely open." It was a photograph. In it, Lucia was smiling radiantly, sitting on a garden bench with the twins, then about 2 years old, on her lap. Richard stood beside her, one arm around his wife, the other extended to help balance Eleanor. Everyone was smiling, genuinely and spontaneously happy. "This is how it should have always been," Richard murmured, "and this is how it will be again. Not exactly the same, of course. Your mother is no longer with us, and you're no longer little children. But the essence, the love, the trust, the shared joy, we can get that back." "It will take time," Isabel observed, ever the pragmatist. "We have all the time in the world," Richard replied, holding both their hands, "and we'll start tomorrow." In the hallway, the sound of a door closing softly indicated that Deborah had left her room. Determined footsteps descended the stairs, and a short while later they heard the front door open and close. "Is she gone?" Eleanor asked, a mixture of relief and apprehension in her voice. "For now," Richard confirmed. "We'll have a lot to sort out in the coming days, legally and practically. But the important thing is that from now on, you two are my absolute priority." When they finally separated for the night, it was well past 2 in the morning. But despite the physical and emotional exhaustion, there was a lightness in the twins' hearts they hadn't felt in years. "Do you think it's real?" Eleanor asked, pausing at her sister's bedroom door. "That we're really going to get our family back?" Isabel smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her tired face. "I think so, Ellie. It won't be easy or quick, but I think we've finally found our way back home." As the twins finally surrendered to sleep, the storm outside began to subside. The clouds slowly dispersed, and through a small opening, the faint glimmer of a lone star could be seen, like a promise of better days to come. In the Ashford mansion, after years of an emotional winter, the first signs of spring were beginning to appear. The journey would be long, the challenges would still be many, but the most difficult step had already been taken. Richard's awakening to the truth about his family and the oppressive regime he had allowed to take root marked the beginning of a new era. And at the center of this renewal were the twins, Isabel with her unshakable determination and Eleanor with her deep sensitivity. Together they had endured the years of coldness and control. Together they would face the challenge of rebuilding their damaged family ties. And together, finally they could begin to live, not just survive. Chapter 7. 3 months had passed since the night of the storm. Miami was now in the height of summer, with its sunny days and warm nights, lulled by the gentle breeze from Biscayne Bay. In the Ashford mansion, the changes were not just visible, they were palpable. On the veranda overlooking the garden, Richard watched his daughters as they organized a small birthday party for Mrs. Wallace. Isabel was in charge of the decorations, hanging colorful banners between the trees, while Eleanor put the finishing touches on a chocolate cake, a house specialty in the days when Lucia was alive, a tradition that was being revived. "Dad, do you think these flowers match the tablecloth?" Isabel asked, holding up an arrangement of fresh hibiscus. "They're perfect," he smiled, appreciating his daughter's enthusiasm. "Mrs. Wallace is going to be thrilled." "She deserves it," Eleanor commented, approaching with the newly decorated cake. "She was always there for us, even in the most difficult times." Richard nodded, a slight tightness in his chest as he remembered those times. The days immediately following Deborah's departure had been challenging, a mixture of relief and anxiety, of hope and uncertainty. The adjustment had not been easy. Years of emotional distance and broken communication couldn't be fixed overnight. There were moments of awkward silence, clumsy attempts at connection, even a few arguments when old wounds were reopened. But day by day, effort by effort, they were rebuilding something precious. Meals were now times of genuine conversation, not tense silence. Extracurricular activities had been reduced to a reasonable number chosen by the girls themselves. And most importantly, there was room for joy, for spontaneity, for simply being. The separation from Deborah had been finalized a month ago. It was a delicate process, with intense negotiations and some tense moments. But Richard had remained firm in his decision. The twins needed an environment of love and support, not control and coldness. And he, as their father, needed to be fully present in this healing process. "Mr. Ashford," called Mr. Joseph, the driver, approaching with an envelope in his hands. "This just arrived by courier." Richard looked at the envelope, immediately recognizing the letterhead of the law firm that had handled the divorce. "Thank you, Mr. Joseph. You can leave it in my office. I'll look at it later. Legal matters could wait." Today was a day for celebration, not just for Mrs. Wallace's birthday, but for the small and large victories they had achieved as a family in recent months. In the garden, Leo arrived with some friends from school, another sign of the new era in the mansion. Visitors were now welcome. Friendships were encouraged. The house, once an impenetrable fortress, was gradually becoming a space of conviviality and affection. "Mr. Ashford," Leo greeted, approaching with a wrapped package. "I brought a gift for Mrs. Wallace. I hope she likes Southern literature." "I'm sure she'll love it, Leo," Richard replied, genuinely appreciating the young man's thoughtfulness. In recent months, he had gotten to know Isabel's friend better and had been surprised by his intelligence and maturity. As the young man walked away, Richard reflected on another significant change, his own relationship with work. The resort in the Florida Keys had opened successfully the previous month, but he had not been at the event. He had delegated the representation to Paul Reynolds, preferring to stay in Miami to attend Eleanor's piano recital, a decision that, a few months earlier, would have seemed unthinkable, was now simply the obvious choice. His priorities had shifted. Professional success was still important, but not at the expense of family connection. The party unfolded in an atmosphere of genuine joy. Friends from the twins' school, some neighbors, even Eleanor's piano teacher and the school coordinator attended. The house that was once a closed and controlled environment now opened itself to the community. Late in the afternoon, when most of the guests had left, Richard found Isabel sitting alone on a swing at the back of the garden, watching the sunset. "May I join you?" he asked. She smiled, moving over to make room. "Of course." They sat in silence for a few minutes, just enjoying the sky as it turned orange and pink. "What are you thinking about?" Richard finally asked. Isabel hesitated for a moment, about how everything changed so fast. "Sometimes it feels like a dream, you know. Like I could wake up and everything would be back to the way it was." Richard nodded, understanding the underlying fear. "It's not a dream, sweetheart. It's real. And it's permanent. We're never going back to those days." "Promise?" she asked, and for a brief instant, Richard saw in her the little girl who used to run into his arms after a nightmare, seeking safety. "I promise," he replied firmly. "I know it will take time for you to really trust that. Years of experience aren't erased in a few months, but little by little, I hope to prove to you that this is our new reality." From the other side of the garden, Eleanor approached, carrying a plate with slices of cake. "There's a lot left," she announced, "and it's really good if I do say so myself." "Your mother would be proud," Richard commented, accepting a slice. "She was the expert on chocolate cakes, but I think you've inherited her talent." "I've been practicing," Eleanor confessed, sitting on the grass next to the swing. "I found her recipe book in the attic when we were looking for the Christmas decorations." The attic, once a forbidden place without Deborah's supervision, was now frequently visited by the twins, a treasure trove of family memories and connections to the past they were rediscovering. "You know," Richard began, after savoring a piece of cake, "we can redecorate the house if you want. Make it more cheerful, more colorful, like it was when your mother was alive." The twins exchanged excited glances. The mansion, with its formal decor and neutral colors, all chosen by Deborah, had never truly reflected their personalities. "Can we paint my room turquoise?" Eleanor asked enthusiastically. "I've always wanted to, but of course you can," Richard confirmed. "And we can finally bring back some of your mother's paintings that are in storage. The walls are far too bare." Later, the twins presented Richard with a special project they had been working on, a booklet titled "Stories of Lucia, Memories Preserved by Her Daughters," containing interviews with people who had known their mother. "We started interviewing people who knew Mom," Eleanor explained. "Family, friends, former colleagues. We've been collecting stories, anecdotes, memories. The idea is to create a living record of her," Isabel added, "not just for us, but to preserve who she was, what she loved, how she lived." Richard felt a lump in his throat as he flipped through the pages, finding fragments of Lucia's life captured in interviews, photographs and even drawings made by the twins. "This is extraordinary," he managed to say finally. His voice choked with emotion. "Your mother would be immensely touched." They spent hours sharing memories, his first meeting with Lucia in college, their courtship, their honeymoon, the indescribable joy of her pregnancy with the twins. Richard spoke openly, without reservation, allowing the pain of loss to mingle with the joy of remembrance. The next morning, breakfast at the mansion was served on the veranda, taking advantage of the radiant Miami sun. The table, once formal and meticulously set, now had a more relaxed charm. Colourful flowers in a simple vase, tropical fruits in a basket, assorted breads on a wooden tray. "So, what's the plan for today?" Richard asked, pouring himself some coffee. "I'm going to the art studio at the Perez Art Museum," Eleanor replied enthusiastically. "There's a watercolour workshop I want to try. And I've arranged to watch a documentary with Leo and a few other friends," Isabel said. "Then maybe we'll stop by the bookstore." Richard smiled, appreciating the naturalness with which they now planned their days, without fear, without the need for elaborate permissions, just young people living their lives with the freedom appropriate for their age. The phone rang, and Mrs. Wallace appeared on the veranda moments later. "Mr. Ashford, it's Dr. Reynolds on the phone. He said it's important." Richard hesitated for a moment, looking at his daughters. In the old days, he would have rushed to answer immediately. "Could you ask him to call me back later, please, Mrs. Wallace? We're in the middle of our family breakfast." The twins exchanged surprised glances, still getting used to this new father who prioritized family over work. "You don't have to put off the call for us," Isabel said. "We know your work is still important." "It is important," Richard agreed, "but not more important than you. Never again." Later, after Eleanor had left for her workshop and Isabel was getting ready to leave, Richard found her in the entrance hall. "Izzy," he called, using the nickname he hadn't used in a long time. "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course, Dad," she replied, adjusting the strap of her backpack on her shoulder. "Are you happy now?" "Genuinely happy?" The question took Isabel by surprise. After a moment of reflection, she answered with sincerity, "I'm on my way to being. I'm still unlearning the fear, you know. I still sometimes expect to hear that critical voice with every step I take. But yes, Dad, I'm happier than I've been in many years." Richard nodded, understanding the honesty of her answer. "It's a process, isn't it? For all of us." "Exactly," Isabel agreed. "We're all relearning how to be a family, to trust each other, to simply live without so much fear." After Isabel left, Richard walked to the garden, sitting on a bench under the mango tree that Lucia had planted when the twins were born. The tree, now robust and lush, offered generous shade, a perfect symbol of how love, even after the physical departure of the one who plants the seed, continues to grow and protect. He took Lucia's letter from his pocket, which he now carried with him always. He no longer needed to read it. He knew every word by heart. But there was comfort in holding it, in feeling the tangible connection to the woman who had been the great love of his life and the mother of his daughters. "We're finding our way," he said in a low voice as if talking to her. "It's not perfect, we still stumble sometimes. But we're on this journey together." A light breeze rustled the leaves of the mango tree, and a few rays of sun broke through the canopy, creating golden patterns on the ground. Richard smiled, putting the letter away again. There was work to do, a meeting to prepare for, and later daughters to pick up. In the Ashford mansion, after years of winter, spring had finally come to stay. The true legacy had been rediscovered, not in real estate ventures or material success, but in the unbreakable bonds between a father and his daughters, in a love that transcends even the greatest adversities. And that, in the end, was all that truly mattered.